You might have seen the videos I did about the European Car of the Year. I did 7 videos over 7 decades, and I got a couple of comments on that saying it'd be really good if you could do a follow-up video where you gave your opinions on each different car. I started to look at that and it turned out to be a monster long video, and it was just this big long list, and so I sort of abandoned that idea. But in the process of doing that, I was looking at all the cars that were released in each year starting from 1964, and I discovered the Austin 3 litre, which was a car I just didn't know anything about. Part of the reason for doing this channel is because I want to learn more about cars, and I want to learn more about what's going on in the auto industry and the history of it. And this one just completely passed me by. So I knew about the Land Crab, the Austin 1800 and the Austin Maxi and things like that, but not the Austin 3 litre. So of course, if this is a car that I wasn't aware of, it must have been some sort of turkey that had a shelf life shorter than Liz Truss's lettuce. And yes, indeed, it was a car that didn't last very long and it wasn't very good. And yes, it was a story filled with poor decisions. So it's a perfect subject for this channel. So anyway, let's get on with it. This is the Austin 3 litre story. The British Motor Corporation, or BMC, prided themselves on their range of cars for everyone, from the smallest, the Mini, to the largest, the Austin Westminster. It might be a big car, but it was luxury on a budget, space without draining the bank balance, and as such there wasn't the refinement of, say, a Jaguar or a Daimler. BMC felt that to stay relevant they needed a replacement for the car that they'd just launched in 1961, so work began almost immediately. But BMC wasn't made of money. This new model would have to be done on a shoestring budget, so the company reached out to Rolls-Royce, who were thinking of branching out into smaller, larger volume cars. Rolls-Royce could maybe work some of their luxury magic on the car, and maybe, just maybe, BMC's large car could challenge the likes of Jaguar, Rover or Triumph. On paper, at least, it seemed to make a lot of sense for both companies to collaborate and save some money in the process. Rolls didn't want this slightly down-market offering using their storied name, so the new car would be called the Bentley Java, using their 4-litre 6-cylinder engine and transmission. A running prototype using the existing Westminster chassis tested out how this combination might perform. But soon Rolls-Royce shied away from the project. The collaboration would have one concrete outcome though. The existing Austin Vanden Plas version would be upgraded in 1964 with a Rolls-Royce engine as the 4-litre R. BMC were on their own to plan a Westminster update, but they had one ace up their sleeve: innovative handling. Like Citroën, they believed suspension through hydraulic damping was the future, so they released their hydroelastic system on the Austin 1100, and it would be used on the upcoming 1964 Austin 1800. The theory was it provided a smoother ride without body roll, so it seemed a natural fit for BMC's new luxury car. It would be improved as well, with the ride height automatically levelling whether or not the engine was running. As I said before, there wasn't a lot of money to develop this new car, so it made sense to choose an existing engine, in this case the C-Series from the Westminster, along with a standard 4-speed manual or Borg-Warner 3-speed automatic. As this was a 3-litre engine, the car would be known as the Austin 3 litre. There would be some changes though. The 3-litre 6-cylinder C-Series engine was used on the Austin Healey 3000. The replacement to that car would be known as the MGC, and it would need some extra grunt, so changes were put in place so that the engine produced more than 150 horsepower, along with making it 30% lighter. Work was coming along with the new Austin 1800, and by 1962 the shape was set in stone. With little money for the new Austin 3 litre, the designers hit on a cost-saving solution. Take the core part of the Austin 1800, the middle bit where people sit, and add a new front and rear. This would allow reuse of the doors and the interior bits. The Austin 3 litre, of course, would have better trim, and maybe this could be used on the higher end versions of the Austin 1800 over time. The Austin 1800 was quite a wide car for its class, so using it for a longer car made sense. It was almost half a metre shorter than the Rover P6, yet it was the same width. So the longer Austin 3 litre would have the same proportions as Rover's luxury cruiser. Rolls-Royce by this stage had a change of heart. They also thought it would be a good idea to take a look at the Austin 1800 centre section for a new car that they dubbed the Bentley Bengal or Rolls-Royce Ragoon. However, once again they had doubts and then this whole project was cancelled. With BMC's design team in love with the new Austin 1800 shape, itself an evolution of the Austin 1100, the Austin 3 litre would get the same styling. But when the 1800 launched in 1964, the looks weren't loved, with it being dubbed the Land Crab. Given this, it's surprising that the Austin 3 litre team didn't think of altering their design. Maybe there was a lack of money to make the changes, maybe they thought it was too close to it being released, maybe they thought the public would get used to the looks, or maybe they thought the proportions of the larger car made the styling work better. Whatever the reason, the team didn't make any major changes to the Austin 3 litre design. But with the project starved of resources, development dragged on and on and on. It still hadn't launched in 1966 when BMC purchased luxury car maker Jaguar, and this came with Daimler Motors. Jaguar were working on a new luxury saloon, the XJ, that held high promise, and with the engine team struggling to get the performance improvements from the C-Series engine and the lackluster reception of the Austin 1800's looks, surely it would have made more sense to investigate making an Austin version of the Jaguar XJ. BMC themselves believed in it enough to take some of their dwindling cash and use it to get the XJ over the line. Maybe an Austin version of this luxury car would have cost too much to produce. Maybe BMC's pride meant that they couldn't cut their own project. Well, whatever the reason, even though the Austin 3 litre was still 2 years from final production, development of this financially starved project limped along. Rather than cutting their losses, Austin 3 litre development continued. The Austin 3 litre launched in 1967, but the press weren't that impressed. The TV screen-shaped headlights didn't hide the fact that this was a car that didn't get the blood racing. They liked the ride, but the performance wasn't anything to write home about. It wasn't even ready for sale yet. This was something of a soft launch, with 100 cars being driven by early adopters to give feedback for the final production car that would appear a year later. In between this initial launch and final production, BMC announced it was merging with Leyland Motors to create British Leyland. The inevitable shake-up of merger courses, plus the lackluster reception of the Austin 3 litre, would be a good way to kill off this project, or rebadge a Rover, Triumph or Jaguar XJ with a BMC badge. It's been suggested by website AR Online that the Leyland side of the business wanted the car to launch to show just what a basket case BMC had become. AR Online is a great site with access to many behind-the-scenes documents, so if this was true, then it shows just what a poor state British Leyland's management was with all its infighting. There was little BMC could do to improve the looks, so they swapped out the unloved lozenge-shaped headlights for 4 round lights. Not exactly a radical change. Reviews said it looked like it had been designed 15 years previously, particularly with those 1950s style tail fins. Rather than distinguished and space age as the adverts proclaimed, it just looked out of date. Inside, BMC added more walnut trim, more sound insulation, and changed the steering wheel position. But that additional trim and the transmission tunnel for this rear-wheel drive beast meant that, although it was longer, it actually had less interior space than the smaller Austin 1800. That's not to say it was cramped. The Austin 1800 had bags of room in the front and back and could seat 5 adults with ease. With the mammoth boot of the Austin 3 litre, you could probably get another 2 or 3 people in there as well. Whether you were in the front or the rear, the interior was a pleasant place to be. The front seats were comfortable with mostly the right support. It fell down in lumbar support, with some reviewers complaining of backache after a long drive. They had no such complaints about the rear seats though. The designers hadn't thought much about ergonomics when positioning some of the controls. Switches for the lights and wipers weren't within fingertip control. The heaters weren't the best either. It took an age for the car to warm up and the windscreen often misted up. Motor critics, though, liked the hydroelastic suspension for the handling, but this wasn't a driver's car. It was a car for gentle cruising. The new C-Class 3-litre engine certainly didn't give the car much get up and go. The Austin 3-litre could barely get past 95 miles an hour, awful compared to the much prettier Rover with its brand new 3.5-litre V8, which was 20 miles an hour faster. Acceleration also lagged, with 0 to 60 taking over 14 seconds, pretty weak for a 3-litre car. The new Jaguar XJ that had a smaller engine also left it in the dust. Contemporary reviews thought that the Austin 3-litre's slow pickup was because of the torque converter slipping due to a lack of fluid, but no, it was meant to do that. Rather worryingly, the brand new Austin 3-litre automatic could only just outpace a manual Austin Mini. It was using a lot more fuel than the Mini as well, in fact more fuel than most other cars in its class, including the outgoing Austin Westminster. Reviewers got 15 miles to the gallon, and with a fuel tank of only 14.5 gallons, that meant the range was only 217 miles, not exactly a long-distance cruiser for those new motorways. There was a choice between a manual and an automatic. Motor critics weren't impressed with the Borg Warner automatic, suggesting that drivers could shift smoother by moving between the 3 gears manually. If you remember, BMC had reworked the C-Series engine to push it harder, over 150 horsepower. In the end, neither the MGC nor the Austin 3-litre would get anywhere near that power. The Austin 3-litre was tuned to 125 horsepower and the MGC only 145, lower than the old car that had been pushed to 150 horsepower in the old Austin Healey 3000. This was because the new engine just couldn't take any more power and be reliable. But at least it was 30% lighter, right? Well, not quite. It was lighter, but not much more than the previous version. What's more, the oil pump carried over from the old engine wasn't up to the job on the new engine, which made it less reliable. BMC had done a lot of work for nothing. No, not that, they'd spent money to make their existing engine worse. Understandably, the C-Series engine was killed off once the Austin 3-litre production ended. The Austin 3-litre launched in 1968, a pre-common market European Union age in the UK, when domestic cars were protected from foreign competition by large protective tariffs. So realistically, buyers were only looking at British cars. But even with this, the Austin 3-litre didn't look very good. Ford and Vauxhall had the Executive and the Viscount, but they weren't the main competition. That came from the same company, British Leyland, with the Triumph 2000 and Rover 2000, and those cars were a much better choice, even with smaller engines and a higher price. After all, you get what you pay for. There was meant to be a top-of-the-line Vanden Plas version of the Austin 3-litre, like the previous car, but this was cancelled with the BMC-Leyland merger. Efforts were instead poured into an upmarket Wolseley version. Wolseley was again a higher-end brand with its roots that dated back to 1901. It used to be the makers of luxury cars, but by the 1960s it was just an up-spec'd version of a bargain basement Austin or Morris. While that might work in the short term, in the long term it devalued the Wolseley brand. It's something BMC failed to understand, and it's the same mistake British Leyland, then Austin Rover and then Rover would make into the 1990s. I mean, was the Rover 800 badge quite so exclusive when you could also buy a Rover Metro, a car that by the 1990s was looking seriously out of date? Anyway, getting back to the 1960s, British Leyland were prepping a Wolseley version of the Austin 3-litre. It had a neat grille along with a decent amount of chrome, but there was no disguising it was a lightly reworked Austin 3-litre. Inside there was a lot of wood and traditional circular gauges instead of the Austin 1800 strip gauge that BMC had told us was easier to read at a glance but didn't allow for a rev counter on sporty models. It was well appointed in the front and the rear, but the terrible sales of the Austin 3-litre killed any prospect of it seeing the light of day. I mean, would you rather have this or the new exciting Jaguar XJ? There really was no contest. The Wolseley's designers felt that this was a crying shame, as they believed that this version was the finest car BMC had ever created. But then these were the same sort of people who thought the Austin 3-litre was something that people should buy, so maybe we should take their perspective with a grain of salt. So what happened to the Wolseley brand? Well, there was a version of the Austin 1800 Land Crab, and it was used as a badge for the car that would become known as the Princess. But after British Leyland went bankrupt in 1975, the brand was mothballed and has never returned. Right now it's owned by Chinese car company SAIC Motors, so theoretically we could get a Chinese Wolseley EV one day. God help us. Maybe sensing a good deal, the British government chose the Austin 3-litre as a car for all its senior civil servants. They maybe shouldn't have, because British Leyland saw the writing was on the wall, and in 1971 production ended. In 3 years, British Leyland had failed to produce even 10,000 cars. Customers were directed to the Rover, Triumph and the Jaguar XJ. Whilst BMC and Leyland were seen as a merger of equals, in reality it was more of a takeover. BMC was in all kinds of financial trouble, and they weren't exactly designing good cars, so when Leyland saw the Austin 3-litre and all the bad press the pre-release model had garnered, plus knowing that they had several other cars in their fleet that were much better, why did this car go into full production? The company was short on cash, so why waste it on boondoggles like this? Was it purely to show just how bad BMC had become? Is there any wonder why the newly merged company went bankrupt just 7 years later? The Austin 3-litre made some sense when development began, even more with the Rolls-Royce collaboration. At that time, BMC were competing with Rover, Triumph and Jaguar. But BMC were running on fumes, and it's debatable that they should have been distracted from their bread and butter cars with this project, which clearly wasn't going to best the competition. It was barely better than the car it replaced. It made even less sense when BMC owned Jaguar and found out about the XJ development, and made no sense at all when BMC finally merged with Leyland, the company that owned Rover and Triumph. British Leyland's financial implosion had its roots in the 1960s, and the Austin 3-litre was a prime example of management and designers out of touch with what customers wanted and making poor business decisions. It's a warning from the past that we can learn from today. Many thanks to the Furious Driving YouTube channel for allowing me to use the footage from his video. On the right, there's a link to a video where he takes a drive in this fascinating car. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.